America sells you a dream, and it's a beautiful one. It's a dream painted in chrome and gasoline, a story of open roads and endless possibility. It tells you that if you work hard enough, if you're smart enough, if you want it badly enough, you can build your own kingdom. I bought that dream hook, line, and sinker. My kingdom was going to be built on 4 wheels. I was a car guy down to my bones. I didn't just see metal and glass. I saw stories, I saw freedom, I saw art. I had a good job as a lead technician at a dealership, but my hands, while busy, were not my own. I was working to build someone else's kingdom. The dream of my own dealership started as a whisper and grew into a roar that drowned out all common sense. It was a vision of a small, pristine lot, a beacon of honesty in the notoriously murky waters of the used car industry. No fast-talking salesmen in shiny suits, no hidden fees, no pressure, just good cars for good people. My name on the sign was going to mean something. It was going to mean trust. My wife was my co-pilot in this dream. She saw the passion in my eyes, and she mistook it for a sound business plan. We sat at our kitchen table for weeks, surrounded by papers, running numbers that were more hope than reality. We made the jump together. We pooled every dime we had, our savings, a small inheritance she had, and the entire balance of my 401k retirement fund. The business loan we secured was the final nail in the coffin of our old, safe life. We were all in, utterly and completely leveraged against a dream. I found a spot that seemed perfect. It was a small, vacant lot on a major automotive corridor. The rent was high, but the visibility was priceless. I didn't see the shadows cast by the giants flanking me on either side. To my right was a massive, franchised dealership with $100 million inventory and a service bay the size of a football field. To my left was a buy here, pay here lot that catered to the subprime market, moving dozens of cars a week with in-house financing that bordered on predatory. I was convinced I could carve out a niche right in the middle, the sweet spot of quality and affordability. The first 6 months felt like the dream coming true. I lived at the auction, learning the rhythms of the bidders, the tells of a good buy. I'd bring the cars back to my lot and work on them myself until they shone, my own 2 hands guaranteeing their quality. The first time I handed a set of keys to a happy customer, a young woman buying her first car, the feeling was electric. It was better than any salary, better than any bonus. I wasn't just selling a car, I was making a connection. I was building my kingdom, one handshake at a time. My wife would bring our son to the lot on weekends, and he'd help me wash the cars, his small hands covered in soap suds. It was perfect. It was the picture of the American dream I had sold to myself and to my family. But a dream doesn't pay the floor plan loan. A dream doesn't cover the rent. And in America, if you stand still for even a second, you get run over. I was so focused on my little kingdom that I didn't realize I had built it in the middle of a war zone. The competition wasn't just a challenge. It was a force of nature, an invisible, crushing pressure that shaped every decision I made. The big dealership to my right had an advertising budget that was more than my entire annual revenue. Their jingle was on the radio every hour. Their smiling faces were on billboards all over town. They could afford to lose money on a dozen cars just to get people onto their lot. The buy here, pay here lot to my left didn't sell cars, they sold loans. They could put anyone with a pulse into a vehicle because their business model wasn't based on the quality of the car, but on the certainty of repossession and the endless cycle of fees. I was trapped. I was trying to sell quality, but the market was screaming for price. Customers would come to my lot, use my knowledge, test drive my meticulously prepared cars, and then walk over to one of my competitors to buy a similar-looking model for $500 less. It was soul-crushing. I was better than them, my cars were better, my ethics were better, but none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the number on the windshield. To survive, I had to change. I started spending more time and more money at the auction, trying to find cheaper cars to be more competitive. This meant buying cars with higher mileage, cars with minor issues, cars that weren't the pristine examples I had built my dream on. My floor plan costs skyrocketed. The more cars I had to stock to look like I had a decent selection, the more interest I paid every single day. The lot, once my field of dreams, was now a spreadsheet of accumulating debt. The pressure turned me into a man I didn't recognize. The joy of the work was replaced by the gnawing anxiety of the numbers. I was at the lot from sunup to sundown, 7 days a week. The kingdom I was building had become my prison, and I was its only inmate. Home became just a place to sleep for a few hours. My wife and I started to exist in different orbits. Our conversations became clipped and transactional. Did you pay the electric bill? Don't forget to take out the trash. The shared dream that had once united us was now the silent, looming wall between us. I was so obsessed with the war I was fighting with my competitors that I didn't see the war I was losing in my own home. I was no longer a husband or a father. I was a small business owner on the brink of failure, and that single, terrible identity consumed me whole. My son's childhood was happening somewhere in the periphery, a series of missed t-ball games and forgotten school events. One evening, he asked me to read him a bedtime story. I was at the kitchen table, frantically trying to juggle numbers to make a payment. "Not right now, buddy," I said, not even looking up from my laptop. "Daddy has to work." The disappointed look on his face is burned into my memory. It was the moment I realized I was sacrificing my family for a business that wasn't even succeeding. To generate cash flow, I started making compromises that went against everything I believed in. I bought a car at auction that I suspected had a hidden transmission issue. The old me would have had it rebuilt properly. The new me, the desperate me, just had the fluid changed and hoped for the best. I sold it a week later. The check cleared and it helped me make payroll, but the guilt felt like engine sludge in my soul. I was no longer building a kingdom of trust. I was just another car salesman cutting corners to survive. The tipping point was a perfect storm of bad luck and bad decisions. The market shifted. Gas prices went up, and suddenly no one wanted the big, profitable SUVs that were sitting on my lot, accumulating interest every single day. Then one of my main lenders tightened their credit requirements, making it harder for my customers to get loans. It was like the universe was conspiring to strangle my business. I was in a constant state of panic. Sleep was a distant memory. My diet consisted of stale coffee and gas station burritos. The dream had become a monstrous, all-consuming obsession. I was no longer trying to succeed. I was just trying not to drown. I did something I swore I would never do. I started using our personal finances to prop up the business. It started with a small transfer from our personal savings to the business account to cover a check. I told my wife it was a short-term loan. I even wrote up a little IOU, a piece of theater to make us both feel better. But it was the beginning of the end. The loans became bigger and more frequent. I stopped telling her about them. I'd move money around late at night, feeling like a criminal in my own home. The savings account we had spent years building, the account that was supposed to be for our son's future, for our security, was being systematically drained into the black hole of my failing business. When the savings were gone, I turned to the credit cards. I'd buy parts for a car on my personal Visa, pay a vendor with my MasterCard. I was running a shell game, juggling debt, convinced that if I could just hold on a little longer, one big sale, one good month would turn everything around. The final act of desperation was the most shameful. I refinanced our house. I pulled out all the equity we had built up over the years and poured it directly into the business. I forged my wife's signature on the final documents. I justified it with the sick logic of a gambling addict. I had to go all in. It was the only way to win back what I had already lost. The infusion of cash from the refinance gave the business a temporary, artificial heartbeat. But it was just prolonging the inevitable. The market was what it was. The competition was who they were. I was a man with a rowboat in the middle of a hurricane, and I had just thrown my last life preserver into the sea. The end came quietly. There was no dramatic confrontation. My wife, who is smarter and more observant than I ever gave her credit for, found the refinancing documents while looking for a tax receipt. There was no explosion, no yelling. Just a silence that was colder and more final than any argument could ever be. She looked at me, her eyes filled not with anger, but with a kind of pity that was 1,000 times worse. "Who are you?" she asked, and I had no answer. That was the day my kingdom officially crumbled. The business was a corpse and my marriage was a ghost. She took our son and went to her mother's. She didn't leave a note. She didn't have to. The empty space in the garage where her car should have been said everything. The next day, I received a certified letter from the floor plan company. They were calling my entire loan. They knew I was insolvent. The war was over. I had lost. I walked onto my lot, surrounded by the cars that were no longer mine, the sign with my name on it now a monument to my failure. I had nothing. No business, no savings, no house, no family. I had chased the American dream until it had led me right off a cliff. Bankruptcy is a strange and brutal baptism. It's a process designed to strip you of everything, your assets, your pride, your identity. You sit across a table from a trustee, a stranger who holds your entire life in a manila folder, and you recount every failure, every debt, every mistake. The business was liquidated for pennies on the dollar. The house was sold in a foreclosure auction. The word insolvent was officially stamped on my life. After the lawyers and creditors took their share, there was nothing left. I walked away with a single box of personal belongings and a debt to the IRS that would follow me for years. The first few months are a hazy memory of cheap motel rooms and the bitter taste of instant coffee. I was a ghost. I had been a husband, a father, a business owner. Now I was none of those things. The shame was a physical presence, a heavy cloak I couldn't take off. I avoided everyone I knew. How could I face them? I was the man who had gambled his family's future and lost in the most spectacular way possible. My wife and I divorced. It was quiet and uncontested. Her only request was that I get my life together for the sake of our son. Seeing him was my only reason for getting out of bed. We'd meet at a park because my motel room was too grim a place for a child. He was confused, and his innocent questions were like daggers to my heart. "When are we going home, Daddy? When is Mommy coming back?" I had no answers for him, only a hollow ache in my chest. I had to find work. My name was mud in the local auto industry. I finally found a job, not as a master mechanic, but as a tire-busting lackey at a big-box retail store. I spent my days on a cold concrete floor, wrestling with stubborn lug nuts and the deafening scream of the impact wrench. It was humbling, mind-numbing, back-breaking work. It was also my salvation. There, covered in grease and brake dust, I was anonymous. No one knew about my failed business or my broken life. I was just the guy who changed tires. The physical exhaustion was a relief. It left no room for the endless, torturous loop of regret in my mind. The weekly paycheck, though small, was the first honest, predictable money I had earned in years. Slowly, one tire at a time, I started to rebuild. Not a business, not a fortune, just a life. I found a small, clean apartment I could afford. I started to save a few dollars every week. I started to show up for my son, not as a broken failure, but as a father who was present and sober and trying. I'll never be the man I was before. The scars from that failure run too deep. The dream I chased, the American dream of ownership and empire, turned out to be a mirage. It promised me freedom but gave me a prison of my own making. I lost everything I thought was important: the business, the money, the house. But in the wreckage, I was forced to find what was actually essential. The quiet dignity of a hard day's work. The simple grace of a son who still hugs you when you pick him up. The slow, painful, but ultimately necessary process of forgiving yourself. I no longer dream of kingdoms. I find my peace in the small things, the perfect balance of a tire, the satisfying click of a torque wrench, the sound of my son's laughter. It's not the life I dreamed of, but it's a life that is real. And for the first time in a very long time, it's a life that is honest. Thanks for listening to my journey. Now I'd like to invite you to be part of it. What moment in your own life changed the way you saw someone or something forever? Share it in the comments below. It might be the exact story someone else here needs to read.